Hello, it's a beautiful afternoon here in London. I'm just waiting for Jasmin Kent Rodgman to join me. Hopefully she'll I know she's been waiting in the wings, so as soon as she's able to join us, I will be able to split the screen. And I hope everyone's feeling well and good on this lovely day. And I'm just noticing that my hair is getting to an absolute state. I can see that Jasmine is joining, so I'm just going to dive together. So thank you for everyone who's joining us now. I know that if certainly if you're in London, you'd probably like to be standing outside. Yes, there she is. Hello.
Hello, hi.
Nice to see you.
I know, human being.
It's been a
No,
while.
I know.
Well, I wanted to start by just having a reminder of how we met. I think it would have been 2018, and
Mm.
it was a film where you were making a short film to be shown at
Yeah.
Trafalgar Square, the BMW Classics concerts we have in
Yeah,
Trafalgar Square. So, do you want to just talk about
sure.
what that was for?
So that was quite an exciting opportunity that came from the LSO. I was already mid through sort of my first sort of encounter with the LSO as a composer. So I was in the middle of Jerwood, my Jerwood composer residency, which was sort of 2017 to 18. So all of that was happening. And then in the midst of that, the LSO were like, you make films, like you're a film producer. So in my other life, I also work with this amazing independent film company called Fury Films. And the mayor of London sort of approached the LSO, sort of a commission to create a film that really highlighted some of the women working within the orchestra. Um, and that was part of, I think if everybody remembers, right, that was 100 years of suffrage in the UK. So there was a big sounds like London celebration, and there were celebrations all across the UK really. So yeah, so the LSO were like, would you be up for making a sort of short documentary? And so quickly we got down to sort of just teasing out some of the exciting women, and of course you were one of them.
Because it was very interesting to me because of course that's how we met. So I had been told, this young lady is a composer. So that was the kind of brief. So I thought we were sort of going to be filmed together talking about the composition, and then I realized that obviously you were producing the film as
Yeah.
well. So and that's something that I find really quite fascinating about your life, because that you have so many. I mean, you were a violinist, I think.
Yeah. A
Violinist,
pianist, then a violinist with shady string skills.
yeah, and a composer and a producer, and you curate amazing concert series that I've seen advertised, and I just think, wow. I mean, where did that all start about? What was your upbringing in music?
I guess you could call my start to music quite traditional. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Loved music, loved dancing, although I'm a terrible dancer now. So my parents were just like, we've got to get her, learning some form of music. And so I started on piano. Um, and that's really my main instrument. And then after a few years, I loved soundtracks and scores and things like that. So I really wanted to be part of an orchestra. And so classic, I was either that or the saxophone actually. And still part of me maybe wonders what my life would have been if I'd chosen the saxophone. But yeah, then took up the violin, learnt the viola as well.
Ah, very useful person to know then.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, and then sort of got to uni really to study music, and then just fell in love with composition there. I didn't actually think that I was going to be a composer until maybe midway through my second year. Yeah, I don't know. It just sort of all came together. And I guess for me, the reason that I loved uni is because, you know, you did musicology, you did composition, you did bit performance. And for myself personally, I know it's different for everybody. I just sort of love, I think I just love telling stories, and I love learning that way as well. So I like meeting people and going out and just letting sort of experiences and things that I see and hear feed into the
Oh,
music. So.
yeah, and I suppose university affords you a sort of wider scope of education,
Yeah.
in that music college most of the time it's so performance driven. Most
Mhm.
you're going there and that's kind of what you go in doing is what you're going to come out
Yeah.
doing. So I would have thought university just opens a few more doors and gives you an idea to sort of, because you can't, I suppose we're very lucky if we know exactly what we want to do. I mean, I've always considered myself very, very lucky because I know exactly what I wanted to do from a very early age.
Mm.
But certainly not everybody is like that. And judging by some of my colleagues who went off to university to study totally different random kinds of,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
often medicine. I feel like the sciences
yeah,
often create
definitely
illusions
some
as well.
medical degrees and things like that, which is
Mm.
great. But I think I had this idea that yeah, university would probably feed into a few more aspects of people's kind of interests and personality. So
Mm.
did you learn the violin because what's your heritage? Are you half Chinese?
I am. I am half Chinese. Mum's from Malaysia.
Okay.
So yes, I spent a lot of time in Malaysia and Singapore growing up. So we would try to go back when I was little anyway, like every year, just so that
Mhm.
mum can keep those ties, you know, and not go years without seeing her family because we're the only ones over here.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, I've loved it. I've spent a lot of time there. I'm missing them now. It feels so weird to think that well, you guys can't even tour. I mean, it must.
Oops. I hope that's not my internet that's gone down. I was just asking Jasmine about being half Chinese, and I'm assuming she was learning the violin because she. Oh, sorry, we lost you for a little bit.
I lost you for a
Froze.
second.
I was worried
I
that.
know, I was like,
No, you were talking about you're from Malaysia and Singapore and not being able to go back there now and
yeah,
see your
yeah,
family.
yeah. It's been a bit mad actually. Thank goodness we have like camera phones and everything now. It's just so great to be able to one call your family and see their faces and speak to you, and actually see some music. That's been really interesting actually. To
Yeah,
jump,
yeah,
sorry, from family to, it's just not to be able to see real people and what we do to
that makes it very
replace that. Yeah,
difficult.
I think we keep it.
But I assume that being from a sort of Chinese family, then the violin was probably always going to be in your future.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I didn't
Until
want
the
to say off that.
it,
No, the violin was heavily encouraged.
yeah, I think many Asian families don't have, a child that had to study
I know.
violin. But you think your heritage has influenced the kind of music you write, and kind of the projects you want to take on? Because I notice you
Yeah.
work with, we have Tangram Sound here, and
I
I notice you've done some
Instagram.
things at St. Luke's.
Yeah, yeah. I think when I was younger, and I actually mentioned this at a Tangram concert in January before this all happened and we couldn't see each other anymore. I used to avoid pieces of work that would maybe quote, Chinese heritage. Um, but really, what I really ended up doing was creating projects that center around exploring things like identity, and whether that be about race or whether it be about gender. So actually what I started off doing, I realize now that it probably is because of my mixed heritage, that I started to create things like I work a lot in cross arts. performances. So I'd create like a music and spoken word concert around race and identity. And then I'd create a sort of dance and music concert that looked at the female body and the female form and expectations of that, and expectations of, you know, how we might view women of color in the media, for example.
Mhm.
So I guess you could say yes, but the last year, you're right, I've definitely turned my gaze towards my own identity and in exploring that. And I think I just had to get there organically, rather than sort of jump in. People like often expect you, I guess, if you're like Chinese, or if you have like Caribbean roots, or if you have African roots or whatever, you know, people are like, are you gonna just talk
Yeah.
about that in your music? And I think it's good to use your music as a tool to push for representation and inclusivity, but you know, you don't always have to discuss it within your music. But having said that, Reese, at the moment, just because of where we are in the world, a few of my projects actually are about being Chinese, or being half Chinese, or Chinese diaspora in the UK.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year as I sort of focus more on that.
Yeah, because I suppose we're always influenced by, in some way, about upbringing or things that we see or what our parents were like. And coming from a different kind of background, it gives you a slightly altered way of looking at things. But
Yeah.
it's definitely, I mean, as you say, it's so relevant for what's happening, certainly in the world at the moment.
Mm.
And I think that can only be a great thing for, say, performances when they can happen again. To
Mm.
have a more diverse mix, a different
I
kinds
think
of voices.
so. Yeah.
Is
And
that
I think
quite passionate about?
yeah, no, I'm very passionate about that. And I sort of try and do work towards that, sort of in front of the camera, or as they say, and behind the scenes. Um, because you do have to be, visibility is key. Um, you know, younger generations have to be able to see people that look like themselves in orchestras, in as a composer, in the concert halls. Um, and so I think that's why, you know, the work that I've done over the last few years tries to always incorporate that, and always be mindful and wary, even if you don't label it as such, you know, as a concert, you have to make sure that your programming is, and this is going to be, well, it's not controversial, but it's a bit hard hitting. I do believe actually that the crazy statistics that we still find, let's just take women, before we even then go further on into maybe women of color that are represented within our industry.
Mm.
Um, you know, there are often very lazy attitudes that, oh, the people aren't there, or the very, very classic and recent, unfortunately, recent statements we've heard of, we believe in quality, and therefore we will just go where the quality is. And I do believe that that is very dangerous, but also extremely lazy. I mean, there's a wealth of music and people out there.
Find.
And yeah, it's not hard to, I personally don't think it is hard to program and curate. It's
Mhm.
about, I think it's just about stepping outside of a comfort zone and just going and exploring more, you know, and just asking fellow artists. If you work, even if you worked at a huge organization and you were programming and you were like, God, I need to really just get out, go to a concert and ask people, you know,
Yeah,
who's
it's definitely, comfort zone is a really good way of putting it, I think, because I suppose with what we're all used to, I mean, I'm certainly someone who grew up with listening to very traditional, say, Western classical music.
mm,
So, you know, I'm very used to a program which would look like some kind of nice overture, a concerto, and then some
mm,
Brahms symphony or something. So,
yeah,
and this is something which has kind of stayed um, as a kind of unit for such a long time, and that's, you know, and it has its advantages, and that's great, and there's
yeah,
nothing wrong with that. But it is great to be able to have the a bit more inclusivity and diversity, and just learn new things. And there's so many things I've heard in the orchestra since, you know, in the 20 years I've been there, and whether they're by, you know, the young, say, Panufnik composers or the Jerwood composers and things, you know, obviously not everything is going to be my cup of tea, but
no,
it's stuff that I probably would never have even thought about listening to.
Mm.
And I just think, and if a few people in that audience go like, I find that really interesting, and I will be really interested to hear more of that, or open their minds to some different kind of arts and cultures, then I think that's where we're doing our job right, in a way.
No,
So
I think that the LSO, of a lot of huge orchestras and institutions that I see really try and push, and they're smart about it. Venues often, I've spoken as a sort of producer, venues often, you know, privately are like, oh, it's very tough sometimes to put on a concert that's totally new music because where are the audiences? They're worried about box office, which is, these are boring things, but this is what people worry about. And I won't go into the long conversation of the sort of chicken and egg of, do you rely on audiences' sort of habits, or do you push them and push people? But the LSO do these great, they have these huge, wonderful concerts and symphonies, but in between you might have like a Ewan Campbell, world premiere, or a Helen Grimes, Grime world premiere, and you push new music out there, and you have to continue doing that until it becomes a sort of norm. I think people expect to go to a concert and see and hear things that
yeah,
they don't know, and because otherwise, if you don't do that, things will never change. And you know often you get to say that there should be more representation, inclusivity, and new music within programming is by no means to say that the sort of more traditional repertoire is bad. I think there's sometimes a bit of sometimes you get people a bit defensive. They're like, but I love these, concertos. It's like, nobody's saying you can't have those. It's
mm,
about finding balance, I think. By saying one thing is great, I think lifting somebody up doesn't mean that you're bringing anybody else down. And I think, you know, we
yeah,
need to find a language. I think we need to do a lot more work, but we also just need to find a language and a sort of communication between these sort of various different demographics that listen and love classical music and contemporary classical music.
yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Obviously, it's difficult for concert halls and promoters because they're thinking bums on seats, and
Yeah.
will I be able to sell things? In which
Mm.
case, I do like it if there's they put some kind of challenge into a program, because people need to just absorb new things, and if you don't, then you would never know. If you never tried a different style of cuisine, how would I used to have friends who'd be like, oh no, I wouldn't ever eat Chinese food, and you're sort of like,
Oh, I've
what
had
have
them
you tried?
too. I changed their mind.
Oh, I wouldn't know, like I wouldn't eat dim sum because I can't tell what anything is. And you don't know until you've tried, and maybe you really wouldn't like it. And as with dim sum, if we're on that subject, there's such a wide array, so
Yeah.
there is something you'll like. You may not, I don't like all modern contemporary music that we play. Of course I'm not going to like it all. That's just the way it is. But the things that I do like, I would never really had a chance to hear them or play them if someone hadn't had the sort of gumption to just say, right, we'll program that, because
Yeah.
you know,
I think everybody needs their first, foot in the door. And once you've got that, you're kind of laughing, really. It's just about, I think it's about, I often say that, so many cliches in this chat. I often say that it is such a wonderful creative city, but there are times that I feel, and especially now we have to be so careful when we're in such a precarious situation with the arts and culture, that London sometimes feels to me like it's a great exhibition city, but sometimes not necessarily the most creative. And what I mean by that is that it is very hard sometimes to get your foot in the door. And once you do, you're great. But there are sort of other cities sometimes where I feel like it's sort of more in the like Berlin, that people tend to push, new music, and it's just accepted a lot more. But there's so much opportunity in this city and so many wonderful places. You could find your music in a concert hall, or you could find your music, I'm just plugging my own stuff now, in a basement, space, in this sort of weird, wonderful installation. I think we just need to change the narrative a bit. I think maybe perhaps I mean, personally, I'd love to see the sort of, there's a lot of positive, well, negative media and press at the moment about, you know, the theatre and the arts and music industry. But the positive thing is that people are shouting about it. And what I'd really love to see going forwards, and I hope that we get the help that we need, the vital help that we need from the government, but providing all of that happens in some shape or form. I'd really just love to hear more narratives come from the artists themselves as well. Do you know what I mean? We always sort of often worry on the sort of very top level, which of course we need to do. But I feel that we just need to feed in, you know, the amazing things that so many, like you said, Tangram that are doing, or I've just seen Eloise join, Eloise Werner. So, you know, there are all these wonderful musicians doing fantastic things. And I just think we need to shout about it, really. Shout a lot louder.
Yeah, because it is getting the opportunity, and as you say, I mean, even as a, you know, a young violinist in the profession, and people say, oh, but you're, you know, you try and get a job, but that you're not experienced, so you can't, the opportunities just sometimes it's your luck, sometimes it's someone giving you,
Yeah.
you know, that helping hand, someone
So,
lets you play their music that so that it could be heard, or different spaces saying actually we'd welcome young artists, or so that we can have something, you know, that just pushes the boundaries, and or something a bit more interactive. I mean, I certainly find that for me contemporary music just has this idea of being more interactive. It's a bit less about being sort of something on stage and then an audience. Do you
yeah.
find that true? And also working in, say, a space like St. Luke's, where you have the opportunity to have a more intimate setting, and people
To break down those barriers. I mean, I love a good old fashioned concert, do not get me wrong. But I also love like breaking down the barrier between audience and artist. That sounds like, and you know, there's a lot of you know, whether you're doing an in the round sort of, or an immersive, whether you have to actually walk through a work of art to experience it. I mean, personally, before lockdown, I was really trying to experiment with asking audiences to move through spaces, because I'm quite fascinated with how you experience and listen to music when you have to move. I mean, people talk about, you know, if you talk about just going out and going dancing, you know, that's a sort of different and a sort of euphoric sort of experience. And obviously that's not that, yeah, I'm not like, I don't create dance music, but the last thing I did specifically with this sort of installation where you had to move through several rooms, and it had dancers and you had to just sort of follow. It was almost like you could follow a dancer through the space, and you were sort of guided through by movement, by bodies, with the crowd as well, or you could tail off and go on your own sort of little adventure. And for me, I find that quite fascinating. What happens when you go beyond, you know, just witnessing a performance?
Yeah. You're just passive in a seat and thinking, I'll just wash over me.
But again, you know, I think it's just different situations and different types of music might like ask for different things. And some people love, you know, just being calm, being still. There are certainly moments where I love just being still and immersing myself in music. But I've also had some phenomenal experiences. I think Nwando Abizi, she's still developing the opera, but she put on a sort of phase 2, sorry if I got that wrong, phase 2 performance at Tete a Tete Opera Festival last year, called Hildegard. And you know, that you had smells, you had sort of, you joined in this sort of voodoo chant, and that sort of repetitive chant like motion just really, I don't know, it's really stuck with me, that experience. But there was also chant in there, you know, so it was just bringing in this amazing, you know, fusion of genre from like chant to voodoo influences to, yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, because I suppose just even hearing about it, I can imagine some people sort of say like, oh gosh, that sounds a bit stressful and not quite for me. But I mean, I think it sounds amazing. And it makes me think a bit of, well, this is like nowhere near that, when the orchestra did Gruppen at
Mm.
the Tate Modern, the
Yeah,
Stockhouse,
yeah.
and I'd never played anything like that before, and just having, you know, three basically separate orchestras on three separate stages in a huge space,
Mm.
with three conductors waving flags when they wanted to stop and stuff. But in the actual concert, they had um, the people were stood, but could
Yeah.
just
Could
walk
just
around.
move.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was fascinating. I found it really interesting to see, and obviously you would have heard a very different experience at what point you were able to stand, because
Yeah.
you know that obviously each orchestra has its own part, and I just thought, wow, it'd be quite amazing to. Obviously, I was extremely engrossed in my own part, not many, but I thought
Yeah.
the actual experience of it must be quite, yeah, just being able to feel a bit more of a part of an experience.
Yeah, I think it's also quite exciting when you realize, when you step into a concert and you realize that your experience is really not going to be the same as somebody else's, and
Mhm.
that there is some sort of control that you have in shaping your own experience. Like you said, you could, if you fancied going and standing more towards one orchestra and the hall, or just slap bang in the middle and just being, bombarded with all three orchestra, you could do whatever you like. And just handing some of that responsibility back over to the audience, I just think is quite fascinating.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
it certainly makes you
means you don't fall asleep in the seat. No, I'm
yeah,
joking.
you can't just sort of nod off in
Yeah,
the seat, and that's quite a good thing, really. I wanted to ask you, what sort of things have you been doing in this three
this
month period?
madness.
I guess, say I've spoken to other composers who said actually it's not that different to our normal lives, because we tend
Yeah.
to sort of be quite isolated and spend a lot of time just working
Mm.
at home. But I just wondered how it's affected your life. I know it sounds like you miss your family, and
Yeah.
how
Um,
been motivating yourself.
it's been a bit of a it's been a bit of a roller coaster. I don't think any one story is the same. At first, it was funny. People were asking me how I was coping with working from home. Even my own mother asked me, and I was like, Mum, you do realize that I just work at home all the time. I never leave my house. It's actually one of the problems now, I'm joking. Um, yeah, so day-to-day life, I guess, writing from my studio, etc. That that's not really changed. But for me, I mean, some people have really thrived. I think I just read about, is it Tracy Emin has loved it. She's like, I've never been more productive. I just read an article a couple of weeks ago. I've actually found it quite difficult. I think you have those usual worries of everybody, like work being cancelled, what to look to the future, all the boring things like money, all the practical things
Yeah, of
of
course they come first. I mean, they come first.
yes, exactly. And so I just sort of was just trying to sort that out, really. Um, but then, things settled down, and I guess in a way, it's been quite therapeutic to slow down. I don't know if anybody else feels this. It's obviously not in the best circumstances, but I'm always one of those people that's rushing around like a mad hatter. So it's been quite nice to actually just sort of be in the moment and be present, and
Yeah,
I guess just accept some things as they happen to you, which is, I think, at first I struggled because I do like to bounce off people and bounce off meetings and come back and be buzzed to then start writing some music. And I
yeah.
think for me, endless time and space is I'm not Beethoven. I'm not like, oh, the hills, the wonderful space. I'm not like that. I'm one of those people that's just got to be sort of like this.
Need to be interaction and
Yeah, yeah. So it's been tough. But what I will say is that I think in the event, yeah, having to be creative about your future, I've actually got some really fun commissions coming up, which I probably would never have had
okay.
if it hadn't have happened. So there's sort of it's coming out in a week and a bit's time if I finish the
Ooh,
music.
that
Yeah,
sounds
it's
exciting.
coming out. Yeah, it's a visual art and sound installation. Well, and installation, it's just it's going to be four sort of moving image pieces with accompanying music and sound.
Okay.
Um, and that's with the Bagri Foundation, and it's called Hot Bee Stars, which is about this constellation in the sky, not random hot celebrities or
Okay.
something. In
Yeah.
case you were wondering why I called why I called it that. But that's really exciting, and that's actually looking. And you touched on this before. It's sort of looking at Malaysia and China, because I spent some time in China last year, living in China for 2 months, which was amazing.
Amazing
And
classy too.
just yeah, just sort of just trying to sort of dust some cobwebs off some old stereotypes and maybe just open people's eyes to some of contemporary China
Hmm.
and some of Malaysia, and bring some of those sounds into, your living room, um, so that you can experience that along with some music at a time when we're all just so trapped in like one house or one room or one flat. Um, so that, and then also working on an Instagram opera, which might or might not work. It will work, everyone. But that's with Chinese Arts Now again. I just finished doing something with them earlier this year. And the Chinese Contemporary Centre for Contemporary Chinese Arts in Manchester. So, that's a sort of digital theatre
Okay.
piece that would never have come about had this not happened.
Yeah, that
Um,
sort of
so
piece
yeah.
where people say, in a way, for some people, it's provided them with a kind of platform where suddenly things that just wouldn't have been able to happen have been able to just be formed to, we've pushed ourselves in a
Mm,
digital way. You
yeah.
wouldn't have thought about writing anything like that if it wasn't
Mm,
for this situation. I mean, I'm someone who tends to try and look on the very positive side of things. So, I try and see it as, yes, that, you haven't been able to play live music and be on a platform, on stage, on the Balkan stage and stuff. But if it means you've been able to do some other things which have taken you out of a comfort zone and
mm,
actually enjoy, so, and enjoy, interviewing people and exchanging ideas and things, then in a way that has to have some kind of positive feeling.
yeah. I think we can be exactly. I completely agree with you. We can be critical, and we can obviously admit the sort of very the tough situation that we find ourselves in. But I think you're absolutely right. I think you have to look on the positive side, and that's what I meant by we need to shout loud and clear about all the amazing work that's being done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I fear sometimes that the big wide world gets one sort of image of how the industry is, but there's actually a totally other side. There's
Yeah,
new work. I know yourself, you're doing amazing work behind the scenes, trying to think of the future and future performances. Do you know what I mean? So everybody's doing this wonderful work and talking to each other. I feel that people are now talking to each other a lot more. I mean, I've spoken to a lot more musicians that I'd never spoken to before, and other composers, because everyone's just sort of opening up this really wonderful dialogue about how we can create new work and what that looks like and how to work around the situation we're in. So yeah, I think every cloud, another cliche.
yeah, that's really true about the whole dialogue opening up, because I've certainly talked to so many musicians who I wouldn't have really had, the chance to, let alone the time, and
Mm,
then, but suddenly to have the chance to, and also to think a bit more outside the box about what could work at this time. And obviously, you know what the LSO is like, and we have so many branches off the LSO with the education, with composing, Sound Hub, and it's it's been interesting to see how we can, you know, I've sort of ended up discussing ideas that I never never would have
yeah,
dreamed I would have really thought about doing,
yeah,
because um, we've been taken out of our usual concept of I
yeah. Usual
once
rhythm.
a year,
Mm,
yeah, and traveling all over the place. Suddenly you're in one place, and I don't know, it's in a positive way really engaged creativity in the brain and stuff. So I think it's, also with this whole idea that we've pushed boundaries of digital content for education is
Mm.
great stuff that it was obviously going to happen, but we've had to just put it out there because no arts organization has wanted to feel irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's not a case of, well, okay, we'll see you in 6 months or something. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so everybody is online, and
Mm.
but I'm
I
I'm
think
interested in your new works.
yeah, no. Well, check it out in a week or so, everybody who's joined. But you will be hearing about it. But I think, I think it's amazing. Well, I know some ensembles don't film or record things, but the LSO certainly does. And that's amazing. I mean, look at the digital program that they've just been able to roll out. I know that's probably had its challenges, but in a way, to be able to stay visible, to be able to keep on, communicating with your audiences whilst you think behind the scenes about, when
Mhm.
we can be together again, because of course it's not a replacement for the real thing.
No.
Um, but it is phenomenal to see what people have been doing,
Mhm.
just with their camera phones. Although I'm a bit fatigued with like living room sets. That's a bit mean.
I know, I
That's
know.
a bit mean of me to say, and I love everybody who does that. But
Yeah,
that made me crave it first.
bravo to anyone who does them. But I'm
I
afraid if
know.
now I just don't look, because I just it's you've oversaturation.
It's because there's a lot. It's more the like you say, the oversaturation of information, and when lockdown first hit, woof, there was so much. Then there was. Do you know what? I'm going to say it. I'm going to get into trouble. The worst thing I saw was a Dua Lipa Amazon Studios live thing where she was in her kitchen, and it looked bad. It just looked like she was sat at her kitchen table with a bottle of water right in front of the camera, like here, as she sort of did like acoustic solo, sets without any band. Anyway, that was one of my worst experiences. I couldn't even watch Dua Lipa.
I that my friend Tommy Hewitt-Jones, who I interviewed last week, did a little Facebook rant this morning about people posting photos of themselves with very high-end microphones, but the wrong way round. Apparently, this is
Yeah,
quite a common thing that has been
yeah,
happening. Like, oh yes, I've just been at home recording and then, but actually the microphone's the
I
wrong,
know. Oh,
wrong
I please
way round.
them.
I don't have that problem because I don't have a microphone, and I wouldn't.
Well,
I don't think anyone who wants me to record.
the great thing about being a composer is I can sort of tell people that I can't do it because I just hand my music over to other people and expect them to do it for me.
Uh, but where do you find that? Where does that first point of inspiration tend to come for you? Especially if you're putting something together which involves visuals and music.
Mm.
Is it organic together, or do you think, oh, okay, I've got some visuals, now I've got to think about how I'm going to
Yeah.
do that?
I think for me, I've always been quite a visual person, although I'm a musician actually. Things do normally start with the sort of, even if it's a color or a shape, I don't know how to really describe it. Um, it sort of has that sort of shape in my imagination before it sort of falls out as music. But I think for me as well, I love to have a theme. I think to have a story to tell is probably the best way of putting it, even if in the end you never see the visual that I'm inspired by, or you never hear directly what that story might be in words.
Mhm.
I think with the work that's about to come out, the Hot B Stars, I've tried to create it where the visuals and the sound are actually being created side by side.
Okay.
So I don't finish one aspect of the photography, for example, and then start writing music. That I've tried to figure things out as they go along, to try and see what happens when they're sort of on equal footing. Because I guess what tends to happen with like film music, for example, right, is you get given the final edit, or at least as near to the final edit. Um, every now and again, if you've got a good relationship with a director, you might start the music before you start filming, but that's a rarity.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, I mean, for me, have I even answered your question?
Well,
For me,
it seems to be that you yeah, it can come from an idea or yeah, or a picture, but you're pretty much doing it as you go along together. I
Yeah, I don't know. I guess something even as abstract of, for example, her, which started the LSO and went on to be at the Albany and the Roundhouse, which is talking about race and talking about resistance and courage, and that very much involves having um, men and women, although there was a sort of focus on women of color on stage, talking about their experiences, drawing on history, talking about their potential future children and how they felt about that, and intertwining word um, with music. And that for me started with a very simple line. It's like, right, well, how do I go about that? Like literally, how do I get a very complex um, discussion together? And I mean, I think Joanna is on anyway. Joe's the partner of Dan Su, who runs Lyrics Organics, and I think it's also about finding the right people. And Lyrics Organics had already started doing a spoken word and music, and that was more about curating this whole concert. They'd already started doing work like this. And Erilyn Wallen, who is my mentor, she wrote a piece about Nelson Mandela's prison release in 1990, and she really, I'm really grateful she revived the piece. It was
Mhm.
performed live and it hadn't been for 30 years or so. Um, so I don't know, for me, it's a discussion. I don't know how to describe it, how it happens in
Yeah.
my brain, sort of inarticulate. And
It
then for me
works.
personally, I know, and then personally, I sort of, I really wanted to work with Selena Godin, who's, I don't know if you know her, but she's a fantastic poet. She's sort of old guard. She's been around and she's such an activist. And she's, you always see her at these rallies and stuff, using
Right.
her poetry to really cut through to people. And for me, her words were really inspiring. So I ended up creating a sort of piece that included sort of sound installation and ensemble to her poem called The Letter, which is in a sort of collection of works called Pessimism is for Lightweights. And so all of these things, I guess, that feeds Pessimism is for Lightweights and Lyrics Organics, doing these things with, Sophia Thakur, poetry for the Mandem, thinking about her future daughters, her future children, and what that might look like as people of color. All of these things, I just think that's for me. I like to build up a story around what I'm doing, and somewhere out of all of that
Comes
comes
your
music.
well, if you're you say Erilyn Wallen was your sort of
Mm.
well, if you can tell her that I would really love it if at some point she would get her percussion concerto recorded.
Yeah.
Was from the 90s. I was talking to Colin Curry in
Mm.
another interview chat, maybe last week or the week before, and I'd been looking for a recording of this for a long time, but it doesn't exist. So I still remember it from the mid
Yeah.
90s when it was premiered, and it really stuck with me. It's an amazing piece.
Mm.
So I would like that to be a piece to come into mainstream repertoire.
Yeah, I'll let her know. I'm sure she'd love
Yeah, I
to.
know.
She's
Thank
like, of
you.
course.
But
Yeah.
do you think you feel so passionately about these causes because you're half Chinese and maybe that you've spent time do you feel this is a sort of dual pronged question, do you feel kind of stuck between the worlds and also do you find you have to shout louder because you're a woman in what was quite a male dominated kind of
Yeah.
our we're probably you know what I mean, it's
I know what you
the
mean.
art
Yeah. It is.
doesn't
Yeah.
have has traditionally had a much more a different kind of scope. You would never have really gotten say women composers, let alone a young woman composer who is half Chinese. So is that something that you feel drives you?
Yeah. I think I don't. For me personally, and like I said, sometimes being who you are and being a composer is enough. It can be enough. I personally want to do more. Like I said, visibility is key, but I don't know. For me, I always ask myself if I look back on my career when I'm old and grey, if I'm happy with sort of who I'm surrounded by, as much as I might be proud of my own work, for me, how your work is heard and in what context is heard is really important. For me, that feels like a really big responsibility as a musician. It's not just to have my music heard, but it's probably why I produce as well, is having that creative direction.
Yeah.
Some might say it's because I'm a control freak, but it's not. But you know, that's really important for me. And I guess you're right. If you know, as a half, you know, being half Chinese and not having a lot of people that look like you at uni, for example, and not having and I worked with some phenomenal musicians and have had some great, wonderful teachers, but none of them really looked like me. And so you realize that you have to work quite hard. You do have to shout louder sometimes, and that's, I guess, maybe a whole nother hour we could speak on if I went into that. But you do have to shout louder. But what I realized is, like, as well as raising yourself up, is to do your utmost to also just raise
Other people.
And you'll find that, and even if that's the people of your own peers or the younger generation, if you do that, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how quickly the landscape could look very different.
Mm-hmm.
And how much change you've had or impact that you may have had within, you know, only a few years.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important. I think for me, it's not lifting the ladder up, as it were. You know, like, don't lift the ladder up as you go up. Always make sure you keep, you know, you also give advice to people if they ask for it. And you work with the younger generation, talk with people, you know, just talk about it. And I think if we keep those channels open, you'll find that things just get a bit better, really. I think when we don't communicate and we don't keep on fighting, I think when we stop, because there's that tendency, and that's fair enough personally, when you achieve some success, sometimes maybe you might take your foot off the accelerator. But I think what we've been shown within the music industry and then the wider industry the wider world, you have to keep on fighting. And it is tiring, but it's also wonderful when you see that breakthrough. It's like absolutely wonderful when you do see younger composers getting more, you know, opportunity and getting programmed more. You see more women getting programmed more, even though it's still very bad. But you know, there's statistics.
Fortunately, it's not great.
Yeah. But you want to see people of color and people, you know, program more than look. I think you just have to do it yourself as well. Like, obviously, keep on talking to the top organizations, keep on asking for boards to, you know, have a more representative group of people sitting on them. But also program yourself, curate yourself, you know, and you don't have to scream that that's your manifesto every time you're doing it. I think just it being there, you know, and having more things.
It doesn't have to be a kind of case of, oh, here's a series I'm doing of, you know, it should just become part of every.
I think there's that classic argument of, you know, people disagree with being called a female composer, and that's absolutely right. You're a composer. Do you see what I mean? So if you just program more, just program more women. You don't have to highlight it, just do it. I know that sounds very inarticulate.
And be like, wow, we've got a woman program today.
Because in a way, for me, I know this sounds very sounds sort of cut and dry, but it is easy to do. It's not difficult. And that's actually a point of frustration that I find myself screaming at, like a news article, or screaming at a program that I see that doesn't include the voices that I think should be included, because inevitably I just don't think it's that difficult. I think what is difficult is changing people. It's not the actual programming, you know, itself. But, you know, having said that, and that sounds negative, I think there are a lot of voices at the moment, including yourself, people that just, you know, want to talk to the widest community possible and want to engage with, you know, new voices and new perspectives. And so, I just think
nothing will the thing is, the world kind of rolls along, but unless you kind of shake it up a bit, or talk about the things which nobody really wants to talk about, or they feel uncomfortable about bringing up and stuff. I mean, I suppose I feel now, and so I suppose I've always felt like very, you know, almost like new to the auction, and I realise that I've been there for 20 years, and
That's mad.
it's mad, and I sort of very much in the last couple of years got very into sort of like, well, this is the time I need to start thinking about the next generation, and helping, you know, those people who were in my situation or didn't think that, you know, I remember, you know, my parents probably didn't think that, you know, I would be someone that would be in something like the National Children's Orchestra or the National Youth Orchestra, because you didn't see people like, you know, Chinese people in those sorts of orchestras really at the time. And now there are plenty, and it means a lot to me when people say like, oh, it's so nice to see people that are not traditionally what you expect in classical music, and that's something I hear quite a lot. And I just think, well, you know, music is sort of not exclusively for just one type of person, but it does need people to just help elevate the,
Mm.
it's not natural, it's not going to be that, you know, who's going to know about some great new composition if no one gets a chance to just say, look, you have to hear it because I'm going to program it, and it's going to be in this concert. You know, people will just go with what they know or what they think people will want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
Yeah, if anybody wants to ask a question, just say it in
yeah,
comments for Jasmine. So if you have
hi
a
everyone who
question,
joined, by the way. I can see
do
you all.
do ask any, well, any questions, anything you would like Jasmine to answer. Well, we've got about 8 minutes left. But sorry, I interrupted. Carry on.
No, I think you're right. I think I've been reading so many articles and just whilst in lockdown, and then I read this sort of article, and it came from, you know, it came from Sheku Kane Mason, and he's obviously a young musician, and he made the point of, you know, classical music isn't elite, as in the music
Mm-hmm.
isn't elite at all. Music, like you just said, of course, any music can be listened to by anyone. There's no, but what it is the sort of people and community that you build around it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I just think communication, just keeping on talking to people is key, because it's people that get into habits, and people that, you know, form their tight-knit communities, people that are resistant to change, or people that love change. And that's what affects access to an art form, or a perception of an art form. Because
Yeah,
you're right, you know, you could be sitting in a pub with someone and they could be like, oh, I don't listen to that stuff, it's like elitist, but they could literally open Spotify and listen to it right then and there. So it's a mental, it's an invisible barrier, really.
yeah,
It's not,
absolutely.
not a physical one. So
It's quite frustrating. I remember there was some kind of survey done, and people had to sort of say the first word that they thought of when you said classical music, and mostly people sort of said stuffy or something, or, you know, old middle-aged men playing, you know, the violin. And it's very, you know, easy to just decide that that then is you, whereas, you know, there is just such a wealth of music that, you know, and if someone doesn't, you know, you can be so put off for life just because maybe the first thing you were introduced to wasn't exactly
yeah.
your cup of tea. But I think,
Mm.
as you say, you know, if we open ourselves up to that. Oh, I see. Jill has asked, Jasmine, your work sounds really interesting, and I'll definitely look into it. Maxine has had a great choice of guests, and I'm learning all the time. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Jill.
Anything we should look out for? What would you suggest of your, whether it's part of your music or Fury films?
Oh, okay. What's coming up? Well, I've talked about Hot B Stars, which is, you know, this sort of
We,
photography and sound digital installation, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Fury Films have an exciting web series coming out by artist Lisa Gornick, and it's all about love, sex, and relationships, and it's really interesting. It's sort of part sort of, it's called How to Do It, a sort of funny quip. But it's sort of part storytelling, part confessional, anecdotes from Lisa's life, and it's really interesting. She was previously, hailed as one of the leading sort of LGBTQ filmmakers and artists, and she's always included. She does live line drawing on watercolor as well, and so as her career has progressed, these two are sort of merged. So it's this really interesting storytelling and live art series. So we've produced that, and I've done a bit of the music for that too, and that's a sort of jazz cabaret school, so that was very fun. Yeah, and then I guess over the next couple of months, I've got that Instagram opera coming out, but that won't be until the end of the year. And I was meant to have
stuck in like Instagram.
I know, you have to, if you go to my Instagram profile, you'll see at the top that the opera handle is already there for you to join. So you can just get it lined up months in advance.
Oh, that sounds great. Wow.
Yeah. And so that's a really exciting project. I think that's really the main bulk of this year, I think, that my efforts are going to be focused on, because it's centered around the pandemic and how members of the East Asian and Southeast Asian community have experienced prejudice and racism as a result. So it's going to be a bit hard hitting, but I'm really excited to delve into that. We're working with this amazing dancer called Cy Rawlinson, he's got a parent from Hong Kong and a parent who's English. And also Anne Chen, who is in Beijing right now. She's a Chinese writer. So that's something to really look at.
So lovely collaborative work together. Wow, you've certainly got a lot of aspects to your career and life. I mean, how would you, if someone said, like, what do you do? I'm a musician.
My website says, very seriously, artist, composer, producer. I guess that's what I've boiled it down to. But I normally, I just say composer and producer, really. Just a person creator. I don't know.
Well, certainly one of the most creative people I've ever met. And just as we're finishing, I have to say, the first time we met, I remember I think I went to shake your hand or something and said, oh no, I'm a hugger, sorry. And you gave me this big hug, and I thought, I just feel like really at ease. But I've always remembered that. I'm really sorry that no hugging for now.
I know, no hugging.
It is not the greatest, situation, but it sounds like you're being amazingly creative. Thank you so much for giving us so many ideas. And I don't know, we've got literally 1 minute 45 seconds if you want to say something that you think is good for us to know about music or this time.
Oh my goodness. I guess maybe just repeating the point about which feels important to me right now. We've touched upon it. So it's just communicating the wonderful work that really is being, and there's so much that I don't know about. But just to encourage everybody to just really, even if it ends up being a sort of chain, like talking to me, who might talk about Eloise and Tangram, etc., and then talking about Cy Rawlinson, who I'm working with, and you can just go check these people out on Instagram. It's just, I don't know, I just really encourage people to build that community, that knowledge base of all this wonderful work that's going on out there. Because for me, whilst I've really missed people and interaction, as I'm sure so many of you have, and certainly watching digital things sometimes is no substitute for the real thing, but just looking at it gives me like hope just to watch the phenomenal work that people are doing. And whilst we are worrying about the closures of venues and orchestras, I think the answer will come from obviously a lot, creativity, funding, you know, being a big one, but I think it really will come from the artists as well. It will come
Yeah.
from that push from the, you know, even if it's an orchestral musicians or if it's composers, I think
So
between us.
keep
Yeah.
communicating, everybody. Thank
Yeah.
you, Jasmine, so much. Take care of
Thank
yourself. I
you.
look
Thanks
forward
for
to
coming,
seeing
everyone.
you. Bye.
Bye.